Hey, chess goalies. Happy New Year. I hope you guys are off to a great start in 2023. I certainly am. I often don't show my wins, but I played a national master in an online rapid tournament, and I was really happy with the way the game went, and I wanted to show you guys it and what I learned from it as well. So we've got the Caro-Kann here, of course, and we've just played c5, and of course my opponent he takes, and then he tries to hold the pawn, and like the best way to play as white is generally just to give the pawn back and go for counterplay. So typically after we play e6, the best line is to go a3, just letting us take, and you play b4, we kick the bishop back, and then, knight f3, and we kick back on the center, you push past, knight d7, bishop d3. Notice that we're delaying putting the bishop here. It's because black wants to put the knight here, and if you can hold off on developing your bishop, it makes it harder for us. So this is probably the best way to play. But bishop e3 is an attempt to hold the pawn. So we play knight to d7, and we're attacking one of these two pawns, and we're going to get one of them back, so it seems. But bishop b5, again, attempting to hold on to the pawn. And here, actually skipped up and didn't play my own recommendation, which is to play queen to a5. And the point is that we want to force this knight to c3 so that there is no c3, b4, and this can become a bit awkward. The knight doesn't really want to be on c3 because c4 is a main source of counterplay in this line. Instead of this, I just played queen to c7. And here, my opponent immediately slipped up and played queen to d4, which is kind of an awkward way to try to hold the pawns. If he does want to hold the pawns, he can actually do it with a super weird b4, which surprisingly does hold the e5 pawn. I can't get away with taking it. For example, if I try, then knight to e2, and then if I take the rook, well, bishop d4 comes, and the queen's actually just getting trapped. I can take another pawn for it, but now knight e to c3, and I'm just completely out of squares. I can try to hide here, but now knight d5, and not only is the queen hanging, but this is probably hanging as well, and this would be horrible. That said, though, this is a whole lot to see, and you can't fault anybody for not coming up with this idea. Instead, queen to d4 is played, and this is just awful. I played knight to e7, and my point is that I'm just going to go knight f5, and I'm going to win back one of these pieces. And if you try to stop me with something like this, well, this is a little bit awkward, because I'll just go here, and I've broken the pin, and I'm certainly going to win back one of these pawns now. But instead, f4 was played, and this is, now I get everything. I guess he must have just overlooked the fact that I have knight f5, and must just assumed I was going to play knight g6 or maybe knight to c6. But here, after the queen moves, we just take the bishop. And after he takes back, we take this pawn. And we've acquired the bishop pair. This f4 move weakened this whole diagonal. And now this bishop is so strong. And we got it there with tempo. The queen has to move. And now queen to b6, which is a move I'm actually pretty happy with. It seems a bit strange to move the queen, like, again, the queen is already setting somewhat nicely here. But the point is that now we're threatening to take this knight, forcing a move, and then we're also putting pressure here, which is going to be awkward to deal with. And white's going to find himself in a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to get his pieces out and get castled. So knight to f3, of course, and now a6, which was kind of the point behind this queen b6, because now the bishop has to move. And the only way to move the bishop that doesn't like lose the pawn on b2 is to take. And now we take. And we're actually ahead in development now. We were sort of awkwardly developed and sort of cramped behind this pawn, but now we've sprung to life. And we're ahead in development. We're stopping white from castling. We have the bishop pair. We have pressure. We have everything. c3 was played. This is really the best way to hold the pawn on b2, but it's awkward because now the knight doesn't have this square to go to, and the knight can't come here because b2 still falls. So this is difficult and a pain. Trying to play like b6 instead just weakens these dark squares too much. And actually, with best play, we win an exchange in that line. So I just castled, and now let's move a4. And here, I did what I do often. I got greedy. Recently, I made a video where I talked about how often I worry about pawn structure and material and less about piece dynamics. And I saw a way to win a pawn, but it relieves so much pressure. I played queen to b3 because it just forcibly wins this pawn. There's just nothing that can be done. And I did that partly because, yes, it wins a pawn, but also was a little concerned about b4, which I really don't need to be concerned about. I mean, white could have played b4 immediately. The problem, though, is that I come here, I attack this pawn, this guy's got to move up, and we run into some issues because I can bring in this bishop now, and it's going to be really hard to kick that bishop out, and it's really problematic. But against a4, I am spoiled for choice because we have such a dominant position. I have a lot of options. I was considering a5, of course, queen b3, the move I played, and then f6 is even a strong move. And those are all great moves. Also, just bishop to e3, which I didn't quite see the point of because g3 happens, and then I don't know what my bishop's doing. But yeah, I went queen to b3, and a5 is just a lot stronger. It prevents b4 entirely now, and we still ask a lot of questions. This knight still can't move, and so something like queen to c2, well, now we can crack with f6, and the position just flies open, and white is really struggling. You can't actually take this pawn. Okay, you can, but now we take back with the rook, and we're putting pressure here. We're maybe going to play e5. If you play knight to e5, hitting my bishop, well, this is great because I can actually just drop it back, and this bishop's going to pop out here or maybe here later, and this f4 is hanging, and you still can't castle. The position's opening up rapidly, and the king is still in the center of the board. This is a big trouble type situation. So this a5 with the idea of following up with a quick f6 is definitely a stronger way to play. It keeps the pressure on white and doesn't give white sort of easy moves to try to develop and get into a safe position. Whereas after queen to b3, this allows knight to d4, and I, of course, need to take it now. And they take back, and now I win my pawn. But there's a big difference now. This diagonal is now sealed, and I don't have a dark square bishop, so white can just castle. c3 is now available for the knight, so this piece can come out. And so for the cost of a pawn, white has lost all of the pressure and actually has some easy moves to make. Knight to c3, and we drop the bishop back. And don't get me wrong, black still has a fantastic position. This guy's weak, this guy's weak. We're still ahead in development. We still have a great position, but I traded massive pressure for a single pawn. And white would much rather be in a situation where they're a pawn down and have easy moves to make, as opposed to being equal material and complete uncertainty and not having any idea how you can possibly untangle. So as the game went, we castled, and I brought this rook across, and my plan is simple. I just want to come up and open the c file and try to get a rook to c2 and try to win the b2 pawn. I'm also really happy if we trade off a bunch of pieces, and then I can more easily attack this d4 pawn or the b2 pawn, make a pass pawn on the queen side, and I should be trying to have good chances to win that. So rook f3, and then I put the queen here, offering a queen trade, which my opponent declines. I think he recognizes that if I have if I simplify the position, that things just get worse for him. So I played b5, continuing on with my plan. I'm just trying to crack open the c file. Rook h3 happens. This is sort of a desperate bid for counterplay that really shouldn't work, and I gave it a bit more respect than I should have, as we're going to see, but it didn't end up mattering all that much. Played b4, we kick the knight in, and now we bring up this bishop, which has a nice active square, which is another benefit of having played b4, is that I'm putting additional pressure. And I'm actually, now that I've opened the c file, I'm starting to regain some of that pressure that I gave back earlier. Rook to e1 comes, and now I infiltrate. And this b2 pawn is dropping by force. There's really nothing. So my opponent played queen to h4, which is really pretty desperate. And I overly respected it. I made the second best move, and I played h6, which gives him an opportunity to try to defend the knight somehow. It's totally fine. I can just take the knight, and if you take back, I can take here, allowing this check, because I can just go king f8, and yeah, you can give me another check, but I'll go hide here, and yes, you can take g7, but then rook c1 is just mate. So you can't even bother to take the second pawn. You've got to come back here, and now my rooks are coming in, and this is a lights out kind of situation. You're down a whole rook, and you're passive. Instead, h6 was played, and rook to g3, making another threat. Again, I can ignore this. I can just play queen to d2, and I'm just threatening to take the rook with mate, and you can't afford to take this. But I played king h7, which is, again, the second best move. And now queen to e7 happens, and after rook c7, my opponent finally resigned. Because I really am going to come take this knight, or I'm just going to play queen to d2 and take the rook, or maybe even I can just take this guy. And there's no way to get the queen back to help with any of this anymore. So it's definitely like a lights out situation. I was really happy to play this game, and hopefully this gives you some ideas of how to punish players who try to hold on to the extra pawn in this advanced Caro-Kann line. Thanks a lot, guys, and I wish you the best. Bye-bye.